We are back in England for another A Medieval History. Join me to find out more about this English manor house and how it could possibly be haunted. Hi loves, it's Aura. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to a brand new video. In this episode of A Medieval History, we will be taking a deeper look at an English manor house named Ightham Mote. Located near Sevenoaks in the County Kent in southeast England, Ightham Mote is one of the best preserved medieval manor houses in England. Architectural writer John Newman describes it as the most complete small medieval manor house in the county. This building is extremely important because it still has many of its original features. Successive owners did relatively few changes to the main structure after the completion of the quadrangle and the new chapel in the 16th century. It remains an example of how manor houses would have looked in the medieval ages. The manor has had more than 70 rooms, which are all arranged around a central courtyard, which is then surrounded by a moat with 3 bridges to gain access to the building. The earliest buildings would have been a great hall with an old chapel, crypt, and 2 solars attached. The house dates back to the 14th century, and the origins of the name is heavily debated. Linguists think that Ightham may refer to early settlers named Edda or Oda, while Mote might refer to the moat surrounding the building or be derived from moot, a gathering place. The manor is arranged as 4 wings surrounding a central cobbled courtyard. The original house was simply a great hall with a cluster of separate domestic buildings and a bridge over the moat. But by the 15th century, there were 4 wings and a second bridge. In the 16th century, the gatehouse tower was added. While the building has the half-timbered old world style today, for much of its history, its walls were covered in plaster or render. The most notable family to own Ightham Mote is the Hotts. Nicholas Hott was one of the wealthiest people in the country at the age of 16, as heir to his grandfather's vast amount of estates. It wasn't until he became 21 in 1379 that he could inherit the knighthood. His mother was able to retain a lifetime income from the family estate, so it wasn't until her death in 1391 that he received his full inheritance. In 1389, he married Alice Conn, who would eventually inherit Ightham Mote from her brother, Robert. After Alice died, Nicholas married Eleanor Tyrrell, which allied him to another important landowning family. Throughout Nicholas's life, he held important offices in the county of Kent and also in the king's service. He served as sheriff of Kent and a member of parliament for the county. He died in either 1415 or 1416, and his eldest son William inherited the family estates, including Ightham Mote. While William Hott owned Ightham Mote, he probably lived at Bishopburn, near Canterbury. In 1419, he married Margaret, the daughter of Sir Hugh Berwick, which brought even more land and income to the Hott family. Margaret died in 1427, and William married Joan Woodville in 1429. Joan was from another powerful family, and as history would have it, in 1469, she would become aunt to the Queen of England, Elizabeth Woodville, wife of King Edward IV. As condition to his marriage to Joan, William agreed to disinherit his daughter by his first wife, though he was kind enough not to send her to a convent. Richard Hott inherited Ightham Mote in 1462 and was cousin to Elizabeth Woodville. This close connection to the royal family made him an important figure in the county and court. As his status rose, he embarked on turning Ightham Mote into a property with incredible distinction. The property turned into a home with inner and outer courtyards, reception rooms, gardens, and guest accommodation of high quality. In 1483, after being accused of participating in Buckingham's rebellion of the same year, his estates were seized by King Richard III and given to James Hott. However, in 1485, Richard was pardoned and his estates were returned. Edward Hott inherited the property in 1487 at the age of 11. Whether it was his age or bad advice, he didn't have the head for business and lived outside of his means. Due to this, he amassed large debts. In 1514, some of his properties were seized and he had to sell other properties in 1518. He mortgaged Ightham Mote but sold the property later that year. Shortly thereafter, he found himself in Ludgate debtors' prison before he fled to Ireland. The next owner was Sir Richard Clement, who was a self-made man who was born into the gentry in East Sussex. With the help of influential friends, he became a page in the Privy Chamber for King Henry VII. He was listed as a page at the funeral for Elizabeth of York in February of 1503, and by the time King Henry VII died in April of 1509, Richard was named at his funeral as a gentleman of the household. When Henry VIII ascended to the throne in 1509, he lost his post at court, but his financial future was solidified when he married a rich older widow named Anne Whittlebury, who was from Northampton. He was a landowner in Northampton and also held the position Commissioner of Sewers. When he was back at court, he was a gentleman usher and fought in the Battle of the Spurs against the French in 1513. The money he made working for the king and by marrying Anne allowed him to buy Ightham Mote in 1521 for £400. That would be a little over £200,000 today. During the 1520s, he embarked in a frenzy of building at Ightham. In order to try to gain more influence with King Henry VIII, he installed the stained glass emblems of the king and queen. More of their emblems can be found on the ceiling of the chapel. He never removed them even when Henry and Catherine of Aragon got a divorce, possibly due to the fact that he never had a royal visitor at the residence. Clement was an ambitious man and had a keen sense of any local disturbance. He used this knowledge during his land purchase and sales, always to his advantage. Due to the notoriety he gained, he was knighted in 1529 by King Henry VIII. In 1533, he was present at the coronation of Anne Boleyn and even had a hand in her downfall. He died in 1538 after making provisions for his bastard daughters and leaving his estate to his wife, Lady Anne Grey. The Selby family owned Ightham Mote for nearly 300 years, from 1591 to 1889. They were originally from Northumberland and were law enforcement officers at the border between England and Scotland in the late 16th and 17th centuries. If you have seen my videos on Chillingham Castle, you will know that it is also in Northumberland and that area is rife with local tensions. Sir William Selby and his wife, Dame Dorothy, a former lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth I, lived at Ightham. Dame Dorothy was granted permission to worship at home since her husband suffered from gout in his later years and found it difficult to get to the parish church. This was extremely controversial at the time in Elizabethan England because the Selbys had fallen out of favor with the local minister, and Sir William was accused of favoring Catholics, which was considered treason with a very Protestant monarch. Like many medieval buildings, Ightham Mote is said to be haunted. Dorothy is thought to be a ghost frequently seen around the moat. She sent a letter to her cousin, Lord Monagle, telling him to keep away from Parliament on the day of the gunpowder plot. Supporters of Guy Fawkes blamed Dorothy for the failure of the plot and are said to have locked her in a room in the tower and bricked up the door, leaving her there to die. There are reports of an eerie coldness in that area of the house, and in 1872 the coldness was investigated, and workmen found a sealed cavity with a tortured woman sitting on a chair inside. Her bones were removed from the house, and a local bishop was brought in the attempt to exorcise the house, but the coldness remains. There are also people who were said to have seen Dorothy walking around the halls of Ightham, and there are also reports of a woman screaming that can be heard in the nearby area, even as far away as the road. Where this legend comes from, no one is sure. Many people suspect that the body was of Dame Dorothy, but others aren't so sure since Dorothy is known to have died on March 15, 1641, 35 years after the events surrounding the gunpowder plot. Sir William and Dame Dorothy were childless, so Ightham Mote passed to various cousins. The Selby men married into local families. By the 18th century, Ightham had passed to more distant cousins, the Browns, who changed their name to Selby in order to inherit the property. The Selby family had a deep scandal, though. Thomas Selby, who owned Ightham Mote from 1791 to 1820, disinherited his only son Charles, who had become a missionary in the Isles of Scilly. No one knows for certain why Charles was disinherited, but it appears that Charles angered important people during his time on Scilly. as well as fathering an illegitimate son. Thomas, Charles, and his sister all died in 1820, with Thomas's wife inheriting Ightham Mote. In 1845, the property passed to an even more distant cousin, Prideaux John Selby, who was a well-respected naturalist living in Northumberland. The contents of Ightham were sold, and the proceeds went to the children of Charles, the disinherited son. During the Victorian era, Prideaux's daughter, Marianne, lived at Ightham Mote. Marianne and her second husband, Major Robert Lord Selby, commissioned work done to the Great Hall. But by 1889, the Selby family had run out of money, and upon the death of Marianne and her heir, the estate was sold. The estate was bought by 24-year-old Sir Thomas Coiler Ferguson in 1889, after the death of Marianne Selby. He immediately began modernizing the building to make it more comfortable, including installing central heating, electricity, bathrooms, and connecting to the water supply. Sir Thomas ran the estate with an old-fashioned formality, employing a dozen indoor servants and 8 gardeners. He would rarely entertain guests on a large scale, but he and his wife would dress lavishly for their dinners, with the tables set with the finest porcelain and silver. During the early 20th century, the Coiler Fergusons would open the main rooms of their house to visitors one afternoon a week and charged 2 shillings for entry. During this time, people had developed a deep sense of preservation of ancient buildings and an appreciation of heritage. The Coiler Ferguson family experienced extreme devastation during the 2 world wars. Max, Sir Thomas's eldest son, was killed in a bombing raid on an army driving school in 1940. His second son, Billy, suffered from shell shock during World War I. Riversdale, the youngest, was killed in the Battle of Ypres at only 21 years old. After Riverdale's death, Sir Thomas couldn't allow the gardeners to make any changes to the garden, asking them not to cut back any plants or remove dying trees. When Sir Thomas died in 1951, Ightham Mote was inherited by Max's son, James. He had no children and understood that maintaining the house would be extremely expensive. He decided to sell the house and everything inside, which led Ightham to have an uncertain future. In October of 1951, everything inside the house was placed in the courtyard for the sale, which took place over 3 days. The 2 farms on the estate were quickly sold, but the dilapidated house was less promising to buyers, and it was in danger of being sold to extract the lead from the roofs. 3 local businessmen, William Durling, John Goodwin, and John Baldock, bought Ightham Mote for £5,500, which saved it from destruction. The 3 didn't know what they would do with the estate, only that they had fallen in love with the ancient charm and couldn't see it destroyed. They knew that buying the property was only a temporary solution, and they needed to find a long-term owner for Ightham Mote. The Town and Country Planning Acts of 1944 and 1947 created salvage lists to protect bomb-damaged buildings with special architectural or historical interest. Ightham Mote hadn't been damaged by bombs, only the passage of time. But in 1952, Ightham Mote was recognized as being of national importance and was granted Grade 1 listed building status. This offered the estate a great deal of protection and meant that it couldn't be demolished, altered, or extended without permission from the government. The last private owner was Charles Henry Robinson, an American businessman from Maine, who bought the property in 1953. Robinson remembered seeing a print of Ightham at an art dealer's shop in London in the 1920s. He saw an advertisement for the estate and immediately went to England to put in an offer. The sale almost didn't go through, though. While on board the Queen Mary on the way to England, he had second thoughts and went to mail a letter retracting his offer, only to find the ship's post office closed. Robinson did end up buying the estate and stayed at Ightham during the summer months for the next 30 years. He furnished the house in what he thought would be historically appropriate while also making it a comfortable home. Much of what is still at Ightham Mote is from his collection. Visitors to the estate today can find Robinson's bedroom and library decorated like he had them when he lived there. He died in 1985 at the age of 93, and his ashes are interred at Ightham inside of the crypt. He decided in 1965 to bequeath the house to the National Trust upon his death, stating, "A house like the moat belongs to the ages. One does not possess it, rather the opposite. One acts as a temporary protector or guardian." The trust has since completely deconstructed the building to analyze how it was built and painstakingly reconstructed it. Ightham Mote is still owned by the trust, and part of the estate is open to visitors. What do you think? Do you think that historical buildings benefit from being privately owned, or do they thrive under a government organization? Is the body found at Ightham Mote Dame Dorothy's, or some unknown woman who continues to haunt the building to this day? Let me know down below. As always, thank you for watching this episode of A Medieval History. If you have any ideas for my next medieval build, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to be the first to know when I post new content. It really helps my channel out a lot. Stay safe and stay well, friends, and I will see you in the next one.